In preparation for his talk this evening, our brother Jim has asked that we read together Psalm 84. How amiable are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts! My soul longs, yea, even faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh cry out for the living God. Yea, the sparrow has found an house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young, even thine altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Blessed are they that dwell in thy house. They will be still praising thee. Blessed is the man whose strength is in thee, in whose heart are the ways of them, who passing through the valley of Baca make it a well. The rain also fills the pools. They go up from strength to strength, every one of them, and Zion appears before God. O Lord God of hosts, hear my prayer. Give ear, O God of Jacob. Behold, O God, our shield, and look unto the face of thine anointed. For a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I had rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. O Lord of hosts, blessed is the man that trusts in thee. We'll now give our attention to Brother Jim for his talk this evening, A Day in Thy Courts.
Well, thanks, Brother Steve, and good evening, brethren and sisters. It's nice to be back here in Granite State Ecclesia again. Thank you for coming out. I know that some of you have come from afar to be here tonight, and thank you for the opportunity to catch up with you, even if it's only briefly. You'll have seen from that reading that Steve did for us that we've actually drawn our title for this evening from this psalm, Psalm 84, which is a psalm of, not for, but of the sons of Korah. And what we have here is a psalm that actually has its roots in 2 Chronicles chapter 20 and the dramatic events of the overthrow of the enemies of Judah in the times of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. But I'm not going to go into that matter tonight. I want just to establish where we're heading in this particular talk. It's all about attitude, brothers and sisters, attitude towards God's house. That, of course, can be his ecclesia. It can be the house of the age to come. It's the attitude we have towards God's house that will see us in the kingdom. We know that faith is what will get us there, faith through divine grace, but faith is about the formation of attitudes of mind and the way that we think. And so this psalm tells us something about the way we ought to think. We all know those words from Proverbs 29 verse 18, that where there is no vision, the people perish. That proves to be true. We have to have a vision of things to come. Here in Psalm 84, we have those words in verse 10, for a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I'd rather be a doorkeeper, says this son of Korah, in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. Now, sometimes we hear people say, well, that's all I want to be in the kingdom, is a doorkeeper in the house of God. Well, I've got some disappointing news for you, but it has a very good upside. You are not going to be. If you're going to be there as an immortal saint, you are not going to be a doorkeeper, brothers and sisters. You're going to be a king and a priest. The doorkeeping role will be left to mortal Levites, as it was of old. We are going to be the rulers of the age to come, not doorkeepers. And that's not a good translation, in fact. You see there in verse 10 it says, if you have the Oxford version of the Bible, it gives you a marginal alternative. And this is how it should read. The Interlinear Bible says this: I have chosen to stand at the threshold of the house of God. Right? Now, why is he doing it? Why is this psalmist choosing to stand at the threshold? Well, because he's jealous. Yeah, he's very jealous. You know who he's jealous of? The birds of verse 3. So let's go back a bit earlier in the psalm. He says this in verse 1, "How amiable, that is, how lovely, are thy tabernacles, O Yahweh of armies. My soul longeth, yea, even fainteth for the courts of Yahweh. My heart and my flesh crieth out for the living God." Now, these sons of Korah spent most of their life in the tabernacle or the temple. So that was where they did their work. So this was part of everyday life for them. So what's he talking about? Well, you see, when the sun went down, they closed the doors. They closed the doors of the temple, put a guard on it, and no human being went into it until the sun rose the next day. It was locked up overnight. They didn't stop the birds flying over the wall, and that's what he's jealous of. See in verse 3, "Yea, the sparrow hath found an house, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young, even thine altars." So you've got these birds, and here is this son of Korah, this Levite, who has to be expelled from the house because they're going to close the doors. He doesn't want to go down to what he calls in verse 10, to dwell in the tents of wickedness. That word dwell there is not the word that you find in verse 4 of Psalm 84. The one in verse 4, "Blessed are they that dwell in thy house," is the Hebrew word yashab. It means to sit down and remain permanently, okay? The one here in verse 10 is a different Hebrew word, it's dur, and it means to gyrate or to move in a circle. Now, I don't know what life is like in Goffstown, but where I come from, if you go down the road on a Friday night in particular, this is Thursday, it's a shopping night, you go down the road on a Friday night where I live, and there's a lot of people gyrating, right, in bars and dance halls and you name it. They're gyrating, you know, and they're jumping up and down to rock and roll music, and that's the way of life of the world, isn't it? That's what he's saying. I don't want to go down there. I am not interested in that way of life. All I want is to be in the courts of my God. And I am very jealous of those sparrows that are flying over the wall, that have got their young are in the house of God. That's where I want to be. So I'm not going home. I'm not going to go down with that mob. I'm going to stand here until they open the doors in the morning so I can go back into the house of God. It's all about attitude, brothers and sisters. What's our attitude towards the things of the future? Well, I think all of us can't wait for Christ to come, to set up the kingdom, to build the house of prayer for all nations. We just want to be there, don't we? But you know, getting there is about what you do today. Getting there is about how you live your life today. And if your attitude to the house of God is that that's where you want to be, that you want to be with your brothers and sisters, that in the confines of the ecclesial walls, this is where you find refuge, and that's where you get your satisfactions in life, if that's your attitude, then you're going to be there in the future, in the literal house of God. So that's how we start. We want to talk about a day in the courts of Yahweh, both for an immortal, hopefully that will be you and me, and for a mortal in the age to come. Rotherham says, "I choose rather to stand at the threshold in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of lawlessness," which is what that word wickedness means. The lawlessness of the age in which we live, of course, matches it. Like I said, this attitude towards the house, it frames the hope of the future. Let's have a look and see what is going to happen to the land where this house is to be built. Some of us in this room have been there recently. It's a land that is in parts quite barren. You know, it's been eroded by the weathering of thousands of years. The Turks, of course, imposed a tax on the trees, so the Jews cut the trees down. When you cut trees down, of course, that does things to the environment. And so the land is quite barren. It has a spine that runs up through the middle of it called the Mountains of Israel that run from Hebron to Mount Gilboa. That's all going to be flattened. That spine of the land is going to be flattened. And the Dead Sea of today, which is in American terms 1,300 feet below sea level and receding at 3 feet a year, the Dead Sea has to be raised above sea level because the water is going to flow backwards up through a little town called Adam, reversing this problem of humanity which goes from the sea of life in a serpentine course down the descender, that's what Jordan means, the descender, through the city of Adam into the Dead Sea where nothing lives. That's all going to be reversed in the Kingdom Age. So the water's going to flow backwards and flow out into the Mediterranean, probably via the Valley of Jezreel. Okay? It's going to become a living sea because it will be supplied with water that will come from under the altar of the exalted Mount Zion. Okay? And 2 rivers will flow down to supply this new living sea, where there'll be fishermen standing at En Eglaim and En Gedi. You can't do that today. Right? You don't catch anything in there today. So wonderful things, dramatic things have to happen, of course, to this land. And what we're going to have is the Arabah. Now you'll see here that the mountains of Israel are flattened. We have a plateau. And then we have this, you see this slope here? We have the Arabah, which of course just simply means a plain. And down on that plain is the city Yahweh Shema, where the mortal worshippers will come and stay while they are in the land. And for those mortal worshippers, brothers and sisters, many of whom will live for hundreds of years, it'll only be once or twice in a lifetime that they'll make this journey to the land. Someone coming from Australia, even if there's a land bridge across the Indonesian archipelago, will take them 11 months to get there. Now, one of the greatest journeys of your life. You can't do this today, or I do it, but not too many people do this, that every night that you have to stop somewhere, you stop in a Christadelphian home. You can't do that today if you're travelling somewhere, can you? You've got to stop in motels for the most part. Every single place they stop, every 20 miles of that journey that will take them 11 months to walk from Australia will be a delightful experience, like I enjoy, thankfully, of stopping with brothers and sisters. All will be in the truth in that day. You think about that. It's once in a lifetime for most people, maybe twice in several hundred years. But it's going to be a spectacular experience. When they come to this land, as I said, here is the raised former Dead Sea, now a living sea. The water's flowing back through the city of Adam and back into the Mediterranean. So that's what, of course, Zechariah is talking about. The former sea is the Dead Sea, and the hinder sea is the Mediterranean. Okay, so wonderful changes. So here you see the plateau, see this rim of the plateau, and you've got from Geba to Rimmon this Arabah form with a slope running down here. And here is Yahweh Shema down on that Arabah. Of course, as I said, Ezekiel 47 speaks about the water that comes from under the altar on Mount Zion, comes out under the gates of the house of prayer for all nations and flows down in 2 rivers, we read in Ezekiel 47, the healing waters of Zion. And wonderful things will happen to that Dead Sea of today. Now, this is something like what the people who are coming up from Yahweh Shema will see. This is an artist's impression, of course, and many of you have seen that. Some of you have it hanging on your walls at home. That painting of what it will be like to be walking up from Yahweh Shema to the house of prayer for all nations. Now, I put that up because it's important, brothers and sisters, that in what we consider tonight, that we lift ourselves out of the present as best we can into the future. You reckon you can do that little exercise with me tonight? Let's just see if we can transport ourselves out of Goffstown and into this beautified land of the age to come, and that wonderful house of prayer for all nations. So it does require a little bit of mental effort, but I know that you're all capable of it, so we're going to attempt that tonight. Here is Yahweh Shema, as explained for us in Ezekiel chapter 48. There are 3 sections, of course, to the Holy Oblation. It's 56 miles square. The top section is reserved for the sons of Zadok. That's the immortal priests of the age to come. That's you and me. And we are told in Ezekiel 45 verse 8 that we actually have houses there. Now, those houses will be absent of a kitchen, of a bathroom, and of a bedroom. All right? They will not have what would be essential for a house today, because we'll be immortal. We're not going to need to sleep. We don't need to eat, although we will and enjoy it. So we'll spend our time there when we're not actually on duty, talking to our brothers and sisters. And, you're going to meet people from every age sitting there because they'll be on duty, scheduled to be on duty in this place with you at some point, just like there were courses of old where the priests served for 2 weeks and then they went somewhere else. Okay, so it will be in the future. Most of us, of course, are going to have duties in the nations as administrators and educators of peoples, maybe in this continent or in Australia. But there will be times when we are scheduled to serve in the house. When you're there in the land, that is where you will congregate with your brothers and sisters. The mortal worshippers are going to be down here in this place called Yahweh Shammah. It's 22 miles from the temple. The temple is here. You can see the arrow pointing to the temple, which sits on the southern boundary of the portion of the sons of Zadok, and this portion given to the Levites, the mortal Levites who will serve in the house. In actual fact, the border runs just to the north of the inner set of celae or halls. So a portion of the temple is actually built in the area of the Levites. Why? Well, because they're the ones who are going to have to do all the bottom end, the hard work, the offering of preparation of sacrifices and all sorts of things, preparation of meals and so on. So what does Yahweh Shammah mean? Now, you might just want to get a bit of exercise for your fingers. Come to Ezekiel chapter 48 with me, the last chapter of Ezekiel. Have a look at the very last verse of Ezekiel 48. Verse 35. The subject matter from verse 30 to 35 is this city, not like we have cities today, but the city of the future, Yahweh Shammah. It's a dormitory city. We read about it in verse 35. It was round about 18,000 measures, and the name of the city from that day shall be, says in the King James, the Lord is there. And the margin has Yahweh Shammah, okay? Now, this is not to be confused where Yahweh really will be. Yahweh will be in the temple. And the temple is 22 miles north of Yahweh Shammah. Okay, so this is not a great translation of the meaning of the name. Brother Sully says in his book, literally it means from thence unto Yahweh, or Yahweh thither, or to Yahweh from this place. So when mortal worshippers come into the land, that's where they're accommodated, and then they're going to make the journey up to the temple. Now they'll go up, day after day after day, doing whatever is necessary. We're not told what manner of transport there is, but 22 miles is a day's walk anyway, so there's got to be some kind of transport to get them there. So that's what will happen here. They go to Yahweh from this place, from Yahweh Shammah. Well, what about this place? Just come back to verse 15 of Ezekiel 48. It says there, and the 5,000 that are left in the breadth over against the 25,000 shall be a profane place for the city. Well, he's talking about this rectangular section here. This is 25,000 across, 25,000 reed square, okay? And this one's 5,000, whereas these two are 10,000 each. So it's half the size of the area given over to the immortal saints and to the Levites. But it's called here profane. Now, we would normally use the word profane as something negative, wouldn't we? It just means common, right? Just something that's common or ordinary. There's no evil connotation in the word profane in this context. But then you read in verse 18 something very interesting. Come down to verse 18. I don't want all of verse 18. I want the latter portion of verse 18. And it says this, and the increase thereof, now he's talking about the areas to the west, the fields to the west and to the east, right? They are for the preparation of food for the mortal worshippers who are going to be residing in Yahweh Shammah. And then it says at the end of verse 18, the increase thereof shall be for food unto them that serve the city, and they that serve the city shall serve it out of all the tribes of Israel. So watch what's happening here. See all these people coming? All right? They're coming from the 7 tribes to the north of the Holy Oblation and from the 5 to the south, and they're coming up and they're bringing all sorts of supplies for the mortal worshippers in Yahweh Shammah. Okay? The Levites will be tending the fields. They'll be bringing in stuff. All these Israelites are coming from all over the land because it will be a blessed land. You know, they'll plant crops and boom, up she will come, hundredfold. So they'll have an abundance of food, and they will bring some of that as, you know, like the tenth, giving it to Yahweh, they'll bring it to the mortal worshippers in this place, Yahweh Shema. So we get a bit of a feel. Now, what I want to try and get across, brothers and sisters, is the fact that life for the mortals is not going to be much different than it is for you and me today. We have to eat, don't we, every day. We have to sleep. We have to bathe. We have to do all the things that mortality imposes upon us. So will they. It'll be a different environment, but mortality is not going to change in any way. Okay? Whereas for you and me, it's entirely different. We won't have to do any of those things. We will be spirit-driven, not blood-driven. And that's going to be a totally different way altogether. We shall be as the angels, as we read. So here's your Yahweh Shema. It's quite large, 4,500 reeds. I just forget the exact number in feet, but it's quite large. Remember that the temple is 3,000 cubits, and that's 1 mile square. Okay? So this is quite a large place. It has gates, and the gates that the worshippers enter from the south, and the gates that they go to the temple and return from the temple are all sons of Leah, as a reward to her for her faithfulness under very serious trial throughout her marriage to Jacob. So let's get down to visiting the house of prayer. This, of course, as you can see, we're in the saints' portion of the land, and there's limited access to the north. What we have here is the temple. We have a dump over here. The eastern gates will be shut for 1,000 years once Christ and the saints have entered. They'll be the first ones to enter once this place is completed. Once they have entered the house, these eastern gates will be shut. Christ is never going to leave this place for 1,000 years. He's going to stay there. Once the glory's in, it ain't going anywhere. He's going to stay in the house. He will get his work done outside the house through you and me. Just like now, right, in heaven, he's sitting at the right hand of God and sending the angels to do his work on earth. So it will be in that millennial period. So we have a dump over here because you can't have mortals without rubbish, or trash as you call it in this country. You know, if you've got mortals, you're going to have rubbish, don't you? So there will be a dump out over here, just as there was in ancient Jerusalem on the western side. Got a picture? And there's a law in this house. It's Ezekiel 46 verse 9. He that entereth in by the way of the north gate to worship shall go out by the way of the south gate. And he that entereth by the way of the south gate shall go forth by the way of the north gate. He shall not return by the way of the gate whereby he came in, but shall go forth over against it. This is not like today when they pull a tourist bus up to some important place, they all hop out, they walk in, take a few photographs and walk out the same door and hop on the bus and drive away. That's not going to happen in the kingdom age. If you come up from Yahweh Shema, so here's a mortal visiting to make sacrifice. He's going to make sacrifice. Sacrifice is on the north side of this house. You know why it's north side? Just happens to run through Golgotha. Okay, that's where Christ was crucified, up here. So sacrifices are made on the north side. And then, of course, he does his business in the house. He goes back down to Yahweh Shema. If he comes in the north, he must go out on the south side. If you come the next day, because you bade sacrifice, and you come in the south gate, then you must go out on the north gate. Now, you can't come around here because this is too deep. These are waters of swimming here. These gates are shut anyway, so you can't come around this way. You've got to come around that way. And the reason that's pretty obvious, you're passing the dump. Okay. And if you're coming from over here, passing by the mausoleum to Gog, which will be erected in this portion here somewhere, and you come in the north, you've got to go out the south. You can't come this way, you've got to come that way. Get a picture? Yeah. Isaiah 66 verse 23 says, from one new moon to another, all shall come to worship before me, saith Yahweh, and they shall look upon the carcasses of the men that needed to be put to death. Now, this is not talking about Gog, right? Gog's carcasses are all buried. Okay? They're all gone. Within 7 months of Armageddon, not a single bone will be left above the surface of the earth. This is not those carcasses. It's talking about the kingdom age. This is talking about the temple complete. It won't be complete until 40 years after Gog. Okay? This is talking about people who come to this place with the wrong attitude. They come to this house with a lawless heart. They come because they're compelled to, perhaps. They don't come for the right reasons. They don't go home. They are put to death like Ananias and Sapphira and are dumped on the dump for all to see as they pass by. But you don't mess around with this God, right? You do not mess around with him. So let's have a look and see what will happen in this house. 2 sections for immortals only. There are 3 courts to the house of prayer for all nations, as there are 3 courts in the tabernacle and 3 courts in Solomon's temple, and all subsequent ones. You have the outer court. Now, I don't know whether you can actually tell back there from you see this little blue line that runs down here? Can you see that? You got that one? Okay. Well, that's your outer court. So everything from the outer wall to that blue line is outer court. You see these arrows, these purple arrows? You see they're actually pointing at that blue line, okay? And another blue line on the inner gates of the circular sanctuary. Do you see that? Well, that's your inner court. So this is your inner court area. Then you've got the third, which is the most holy. That's, of course, where only immortals will be able to go. Okay, so mortals can access, all of the area that you can see except that which is coloured in blue. They can't come over here to the east. The east gates are shut on the outside, so there's no entry there. And these gates are shut 6 days of the week. They're only open on a Sabbath and on a new moon. Okay? So this area is for Christ and the saints. That's where we will actually sit down with him, to eat meals with him and to partake of bread and wine on the occasions when we happen to be there. So mortals are restricted in their access to certain parts of this house because the glory will have returned. And the glory, of course, is going to be actually covered by a cloud. This is a very old painting by someone. It has a cloud. You can still see the mountain and the altar. Well, that won't be the case in the kingdom age. Okay? It's actually going to be concealed by a cloud. So just imagine yourself, brothers and sisters, in that eastern court, and no mortals there, no kids running around, no noise, just wonderful discussion and fellowship of immortals who happen to be there on that occasion. It's just going to be a marvellous experience. Well, I want you to come to Luke chapter 12 with me, if you would. Luke 12. We're going to read it from verse 35 of Luke 12. Let your loins be girded about and your lights burning, and ye yourselves like unto men that wait for their Lord, when he will return from the wedding, that when he cometh and knocketh, they may open unto him immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself and make them sit down to food, and will come forth and serve them. Now, think about that. This is the occasions when Christ gathers into the eastern row of Celle, all right? These are the gates that have been permanently shut, okay? They're shut permanently when he comes in. He resides in this building, and he's going to invite us there, when we're in the land, to sit down with him for meals. But there'll be no waiters or waitresses. He will be the server. Really? I thought he was King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Don't you think we should serve him, brothers and sisters? So what's he teaching you and me? Well, he made a statement that he that would be greatest among you, let him be your servant. Was that a principle that applied just to the present? Or does that apply eternally? Yeah. He's going to make it apply eternally. He's going to continue to serve us, brothers and sisters, even as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now, if we can't bring ourselves to serve our brothers and sisters today, given that fact, then we've got a problem, haven't we? We've got a real problem, because we're not going to be there in the kingdom, because that is how you get there. by being a manifestation of Jesus Christ himself. You cease to serve yourself, but you might serve others, as he did and as he will in the age to come. He's going to do that in this section. But then on the Sabbaths, he's going to actually make his own sacrifices and worship in the chamber of the singers along with the saints that happen to be there on that day. Now, we're going to read about this in a minute. We're going to have a look, because I want you to come to Ezekiel chapter 46, and we'll see exactly what's going to happen here. Now, obviously, we're talking now about a day in the life of an immortal saint. But it's also going to impact the lives of mortal worshippers who come to this house. Ezekiel chapter 46. Thus saith Adonai Yahweh, the gate of the inner court, notice how you need to know where these things are, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. It's a special Sabbath. And the prince shall enter by the way of the porch of that gate without. Now, let's get our bearings straight. Where was the blue line? That was the boundary between the outer court and the inner court. Well, it was here. Now, that's the east that way, okay? Mount Zion's to the left here, okay? The boundary of the outer court, and this is the inner court here, is here, right? So when it says that the gate of the inner court is shut for 6 days, it's actually talking about these gates out here, so that nobody can access this eastern side of the house for 6 working days. It's open on the Sabbath, not for them to enter, but for Christ to leave and to go inside into the inner circular sanctuary, okay? Now that's what I want you to follow me. Sacrifices will be made for the prince right there by the saints whom he chooses on this day to be his priest. Now think about this. Can you imagine sitting there with Christ for a meal and he comes along and serves you? And then, as the meal progresses, he stands up and says, Brother Jason and Brother Steve, you are going to be my priests today. It's a Sabbath. And I'm going to make sacrifices, burnt sacrifices, and you are going to be my priests. So you will follow him after the meal at the appropriate time, which will just be a little bit before 3 p.m, an hour or so before 3 p.m. And you will follow him from this building where you have been sitting with him across the 100-cubit pavement to this little porch here where there will be ways and means of preparing his sacrifices. Now, some people have a problem with Christ making sacrifice in the kingdom. Really? Why would you have a problem with that? I mean, he was the one who came bearing our nature, brothers and sisters. He had as much need of redemption as you and I. He was perfectly obedient, so therefore the grave couldn't hold him, but he had to be redeemed. How was he redeemed? By perfect obedience to his God. That brought about his resurrection and immortalisation. That's how he got his redemption. So why wouldn't he want to remember that? Why wouldn't he want to tell the world that? Because they're all like him. They're mortal. They needed redemption too, just like you and I need it. So therefore he will sacrifice to get that message across. And sacrifice is not just about, is it, the negative side. What is sacrifice really about? It's about commitment to God, isn't it? It's about sacrificing yourself that you might serve your God, and you best serve your God by serving his children. Okay, simple, isn't it? It's so simple. And that's why he will make sacrifice in the kingdom age, to remind everybody that he, like them, is redeemed by sacrifice, his own. So you'll get your turn. Somewhere in 1,000 years, you'll get your turn to be his priest. So get ready for that, because it's going to happen one day. Then, when the sacrifices have been prepared, he moves here to the threshold of this now open gate. I want to show you what's going to happen here. I haven't quite gone far enough in Ezekiel 46. I want to read verses 2 and 3. It says this, And the prince shall enter by the way of the porch of that gate. You notice it says porch? Porch here. Yeah, porch of that gate. Okay. He shall enter by the porch of that gate without, and shall stand by the post of the gate, and the priests shall prepare his burnt offering and his peace offerings, and he shall worship. Now you're going to stand there while you're preparing his offerings. Now, how do we know that this is not the Levites who are doing this? Well, you see, the Levites operate on the north side of the house. This is the east side. This is an area where mortals can't go. So we know they're immortal priests, and they're referred to in verse 10 of Ezekiel 46. Won't go into the complexities of that, but they're referred to in verse 10 of this chapter. Okay, so get a picture of that? Well, what happens then? It says in verse 2 of Ezekiel 46, he shall worship at the threshold of the gate, then he shall go forth, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. So this is a Sabbath or a new moon. Likewise, the people of the land shall worship at the door of this gate before Yahweh in the Sabbaths and in the new moons. So here it is. Now, I've just read to you that section, Ezekiel 46, verses 1 to 3. There's your text. Okay? This is the gate, all right, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut 6 working days. So these are the gates along here. All right? They're shut. 6 working days. The prince shall enter by the way of the porch of that gate. He shall stand by the post of the gate in the porch, which is on the right-hand side of that row of buildings. Got it? His priest shall prepare his offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold. So he's back now. He's come inwards. Now he's standing on the threshold and looking across to the circular sanctuary. He's got 100 cubits. If he's here at the narrowest part, he's got 100 cubits, which is 200 feet. All right, 200 feet. Looking across to the circular sanctuary. If he happens to be somewhere further down, of course, it's a greater distance across to the circular sanctuary. So get a picture in your mind. And we're told there that the people are going to come and watch him worship. So the people gather here in the separate place. So they've done their bit in the temple. They've made their sacrifice on the north side, or they've come from the south. They've done their bit in the house. Now they want to watch the prince worship. You think about the impact upon people standing, watching Christ worship. Well, his priests beside him, and tucked under their arms, are his sacrifices that are going to be taken across into the inner sanctuary, across the floor to the inner gates, where there will be immortal priests waiting to receive them, to place them on the table before Yahweh, to convey them around to the east side and up the steps to the altar. Get a picture of that in your mind, okay? Now, that's what you're going to be doing one day. It's best to be there beforehand. Best to get a bit of a picture beforehand, just so it's not a surprise to you when it happens. Because all this detail is here, brothers and sisters. Every little detail that you want to know is here in this record. It's a marvellous thing that our God's done for us. So the people are standing there watching. And when it says he goes forth, did you see it says, he shall go forth. See, there's words here. He doesn't mean outside the temple. He's not going to leave this building. It means he goes forth from this row of celae across the separate place and into the inner circular sanctuary. Obviously he's going to go up to the altar and get involved in all of that as well. I want you to come to Psalm 116. Psalm 116 is a resurrection psalm, messianic. You know that. Paul quotes it in relation to Christ's sacrifice and resurrection. If you don't have a note in Psalm 116 to that effect, it's not a bad idea to put one there. You see those words in verse 10 of Psalm 116? I believed, therefore have I spoken. Paul quotes them word for word in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 13. And you go to 2 Corinthians 4, what do you find? He's talking about the sacrifice of Christ. So this is clearly a messianic psalm. And it's a psalm about what we've just been talking about. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Just come down to verse 13, perhaps. Maybe verse 12. What shall I render unto Yahweh for all his benefits toward me? I will take the cup of salvation and call upon the name of Yahweh. Now, as we read these words, these are coming out of the mouth of Christ, okay? Messianic. Words from the mouth of Christ. Verse 14. I will pay my vows unto Yahweh now in the presence of all his people. Well, don't you think he's paid his vows? You think Christ has paid his vows? He doesn't think so. He will not have paid his vows, brothers and sisters, until his work is complete. Until sin and death have been utterly removed from the earth. That's when he will have paid his vows. His sacrifice, his resurrection and immortalisation was just the first of 3 phases. The second is about to happen to you and me, and the third will be at the end of the millennium, when mortality is completely abolished. Okay? He will not have paid his vows to his God until that work is done. So what's he going to do? He's going to do it in the presence of all his people. We're going to find out where that is in a minute. But let's read on. Verse 15. Precious in the sight of Yahweh is the death of his saints. That's what the King James Version says. It's not quite accurate. But it's true that when we die, we're buried in what's called, in John chapter 5, memorial graves. Because they're remembered. And the angels are going to turn up and raise us from the dead. Yeah. But that's not what this is about. It should read this way. Precious in the sight of Yahweh is the death for his saints. What death might that be? Yeah. The sacrifice of Christ. Yeah. That's what's precious in the eyes of Yahweh. So he says in verse 17, I will offer to thee the sacrifice of thanksgiving and will call upon the name of Yahweh. I will pay my vows unto Yahweh now in the presence of all his people. Now, where is this? The last verse of the psalm tells us where it is. Verse 19. In the courts of Yahweh's house, in the midst of thee, O Jerusalem. In other words, what we've just been talking about, right? When he comes to worship and he stands here at the threshold of the gate and he's got his priests with him, all the people are out here in the separate place. Can you imagine them all trying to get a view of Christ? You know, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and they're all there trying to peer over the short people like Zacchaeus, trying to find a way to get up higher. Yeah, fabulous. You get that picture in your mind, brothers and sisters, of all these mortal people that are seeing something that very few are going to see. The Prince worshipping and about to make sacrifice, to take the sacrifices across to the altar. Wonderful things. And he's going to pay his vows. He's going to commit himself to the fulfilment of the work God gave to him, which will be played out over that 1,000-year period. What a day that will be in the life of both an immortal and a mortal. Okay? What a day that will be. And then, of course, he will make his way across to the chambers of the singers. That's what it's called. You know, I can't sing for nuts, really. You know, there are occasions when you get in the shower and you think you're Pavarotti. But I'll have to wait. I'll have to wait until the day. And then we will be even better than Pavarotti and company. And we'll better raise our voices in a way that we cannot do today, with mortal frailty and weakness. What a wonderful thing when you've got several 100,000. By the way, this house can accommodate 500,000 people a day. Just imagine several 100,000 saints gathered in the 3 levels. There's 3 levels in this building, this circular inner sanctuary, singing with loud voices, music that the world has never heard before. Can you imagine that? It sends shivers up my spine. But it's going to be a reality one day, and guess who's going to be there with us? Yeah. The one who gave himself, the death that is precious in the sight of Yahweh. Yeah. What a time that will be. So there's your 3 levels in the chambers of the singers. Now, just a brief word. I want you to come to Isaiah, if you would. Isaiah chapter 4. Just a brief word about what the mortals will see when they come to this place. Isaiah chapter 4. I'm going to read it from verse 5. And Yahweh will create upon every dwelling place of Mount Zion and upon her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For upon all the glory shall be a defence. Now Rotherham translates the latter portion this way. For over all the glory shall be a canopy. Now we just read about a cloud. Now this is an artist's attempt to show that. The cloud's not big enough, of course, because it was a sister who did this. If she was to put the cloud where it truly belongs, then you wouldn't see the mountain at all. But that's the way the mortals will see it. Not you and I, because we're going to go inside. We're going to be inside the cloud. Okay? But the mortals are not going to see the glory which would destroy them if they were exposed to it. The cloud will hide that glory. What they will see is the glow of the glory, and they'll also see the glow of the accepted sacrifices. There's no wood on this altar. It's a huge altar. You know, it's 100 cubits square. Really? Now, it's 200 feet. I mean, the actual altar itself is a bit smaller than that, but that's ridiculous. You imagine the number of sacrifices on there, and there's no wood. In fact, there's water coming up underneath it and coming out and running down the south side under the gates out north and south down to the Dead Sea, or Living Sea as it will be then. So how are these sacrifices going to be accepted every day? Well, by fire from heaven, like they were in the time of Solomon, remember? Yeah, fire from heaven. At what time? 3 p.m, the moment that Christ died on the cross. Yeah, what a wonderful thing that will be. You'll hang around for that, won't you, if you're immortal? So, as worshippers approach the sanctuary, and some of them are going to go up these steps here, because sitting on 389 thrones around that circular sanctuary every day will be saints ready to give advice, counsel, instruction, and make judgments about issues that are brought to them. That's what we're going to be doing there, brothers and sisters. But what they will see, these mortals who come, is the cloud with its rim on the inner side of this building, okay? Like a canopy over the mountain. So those thrones of the house of David, and that's what Psalm 122 verse 5 is about. The thrones of the house of David is the phrase. Those thrones of the house of David. Can you see the curvature of that building? Is that obvious to you, the curvature? So Mount Zion is this way, true? So you've got the curvature of the circular sanctuary, which is massive. And those thrones are actually set here at the top of the steps. Every step is at least 389, and a saint will be sitting there. You'll get your turn on that. You'll be sitting in one of those thrones, and up these steps will come the mortals. They come up the left-hand side, they go down the right-hand side. They'll come up and they'll stand in front of you and say, look, I got a few problems. Can you give me some advice? And you'll give them scriptural advice based on your experience. And now, of course, you won't have the hindrance of mortality to get in the way. You'll give them the advice they need, and they'll go away to implement those things. So that's one of the duties we perform as kings. We've just seen priests, haven't we? Kings in the age to come. And of course that will also be done outside of the land as well. Okay, so that's just a brief little note about that. Now the boundary of the most holy, where only immortals can go, and the inner court where mortals can go under certain conditions. For example, mortal Levites will climb these steps, bringing the sacrifices of the people, the mortal people, that have been made at the north gate of the temple, the place of sacrifice. They will bring the bits that have got to go to the altar across this floor to these doors here. And waiting for them will be immortal priests to take it out of their hands and to place it on a table that will go take it around to the eastern side of the house. Got a picture of that? Right, good. But this is what it looks like. You see Isaiah 4 verse 5? This is Rotherham's translation. Yahweh will create over all the home of Mount Zion, because it is our home, brothers and sisters, and over her assembly a cloud by day and a smoke and the shining of a fire flame by night. For over all the glory shall be a canopy. So here's your canopy. You see where it sits? On the inner side of the circular sanctuary. Sits up over the mountain, okay? Obscuring the direct glory from the mortal gaze. Got that picture? You reckon that's possible to have a cloud sitting like that permanently for 1,000 years? You think it's possible? Well, all things are possible to God, aren't they? But it even exists today. Did you know that? It exists today. You go to the Antarctic, to Mount Erebus, and that's what you'll see. That cloud sitting like an umbrella above the mountain, it's there permanently. So if God can do it today, then he can do it tomorrow. So there will be a cloud, and when they come towards this house from afar, they will see the mountain, but the mountain will look like a cloud, because the cloud will be over the mountain. Okay? And they'll see the glow of the glory behind that cloud. What a wonderful thing that is. So the mortals are going to have some wonderful experiences. Now, I'm going to finish this talk tonight by whipping you through a day in the life of a mortal worshipper. So follow me. We're going to do it both in text and in map form. Okay? So let's start with the text form first. A mortal worshipper will arrive at the house of prayer via the western side, passing by the dump. Now we saw that. There's a reason for that. A reminder that you come into this house, you've got to have your heart right. You've got to have your attitudes right. Okay? That's the reminder. They cross the river on the north side. Now you know that, of course, there's 3 depths of water. For 1,000 cubits, there's ankle-deep water. Then for another 1,000 cubits, on the north and south side, there's knee-deep water. And then for another 1,000 cubits, there's waist-deep water, or thigh-deep water. What's that for? Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? The knee-deep water is in the middle, which is where your Levites on the north side are going to have, they're going to do their washing their hands, and they're going to sacrifice, they're going to be covered in blood. Okay. The ankle-deep water is for those who are baptised, who've been buried in water, who only need to wash their feet. Right? Just like Christ said, if you've been washed properly, then you just need to wash your hands and your feet thereafter. So it's ankle-deep for that purpose. But what about the waist-deep water? Well, that's for those who are going to be baptised. Okay? So there's provision made for everyone that comes to this place. They're met by a Levite and make a sacrifice at the slaying blocks at the north gate. They accompany the Levite into the house and watch the sacrifices being prepared and distributed. Some go, of course, to the corner towers that are used as the cooking places for the fellowship meals that will be held in this house on a daily basis. They will spend some time mingling with others on the outer court pavement, absorbing this experience, and then move inwards through one of the gates of the inner court to the separate place. Now remember, the separate place is where the people gathered to see Christ worshipping and stand astonished at the grandeur of the sanctuary before them. They met by a Levite and ascend the steps of the inner temple to stand before one of the saints sitting to judge and counsel mortals. Remember those 389 thrones that you're going to sit on one day? Returns to the separate place and moves to the eastern court to observe the prince worshipping. Yeah, just like we've seen. Walks about Zion, passing through the southern court, outer cella, to the western upper cella. I mean, you could find a place on the north or the south if you wanted to. But we've got the west here, for example. And they find a place to sit down amongst the 500,000 people that might be there and to share in the fellowship meal. Share in that meal with many, many others from all over the world. Returns to the inner court to pray and listen to the saints in the chamber of the singers. That's going to be an experience and a half. And stands awestruck as the day's sacrifices are accepted and in humility departs through the south gate back to Yahweh Shema. Now that's your text form. Now I'm going to do it in map form. You ready for this? Follow the green arrows. Here's the itinerary of a day in the house. Arrives at the river on the north side, crosses and makes sacrifice. Okay? Enters the gates and passes through the outer court to the inner court and judgment, standing before one of the saints sitting on one of the thrones of the house of David. Moves to witness the prince worship at the post of the east gate, the threshold, then walks about Zion to the western side of the house where he finds a place on one of the 3 levels to sit down for a meal. moves to the inner court to hear the saints singing in the chambers of the singers. This is the chambers of the singers. And then, of course, reluctantly moves to the outer court, leaves via the south gate for Yahweh Shema. It's a day in the life of a mortal worshipper. And you know what they would have done? Exactly what Psalm 48 verses 12 and 13 says they'll do. Walk about Zion and go round about it. Yep, right around. Right? Walk about Zion, go round about it. Tell the towers, there are 4 towers. Okay? Consider her palaces. Mark ye well her bulwarks, consider her palaces. Palaces? Yeah, they're in a palace. That ye may tell it to the generation following. And they'll go home and tell their kids and their grandkids about this. And their kids will say, Dad, Grandpa, I can't wait to go up to this place. Yeah, my son, it's going to take you from Australia. You're going from Brisbane. It's going to take you 11 months to get there, so you better plan this. You're going to have someone look after your fields at home and your animals and your crops while you're away. But you better plan this very well. And when you do, make sure you do it properly. And every night you stop, you're going to be stopping in a Christadelphian home and do the Bible readings under candlelight, or maybe in the morning light, okay? And then you're going to make your journey and you'll go to this place and you'll never, ever forget it. And you're going to come home and do what I'm doing. You're going to tell it to the generations following. What a fabulous thing that's going to be. I don't know about you, brothers and sisters, but I really want to be there. I really want to be there. And I know you do too. And if our attitude towards the house of God is right today, we will be there tomorrow. That's the promise that our God gives us. The path of the just, says the proverb, is as a shining light that shineth more and more unto the perfect day. Now think about that for a while. Is that what happens to everyone? Is it? Is your path to the kingdom shining brighter every day? Or is the world doing what it's doing to too many of our folk, darkening that path and making it very dim? There's the challenge we have, brothers and sisters. The days are short, Christ will soon come. The signs clearly indicate that. And what we would say to what we've considered tonight is the simple words of John. Even so come, Lord Jesus.